That's how you do it?
The Blue Boy Scout, the last son. Not a bird, not a plane, but a man. A Superman. Welcome, all you beautiful ladies and animals, to yet another delve into the universe of 40k with the inclusion of the archetypal hero, the ideal, the standard Superman. We've definitely come close to this before, looking at Bruce and the Viltrumites in previous videos, but today is special. Today is different, because today I get to spill some Grimhope all over the place. Superman is a fantastic character, dare I say the best hero character. You may have your favorites. I'm not even sure if he's my favorite, but he's the classic hero for a reason. When you hear the word superhero, you think of that bright yellow and red badge. When you look to the sky and imagine flying, you remember the first time you saw Clark Kent take off into space. So join me, dear viewer, as today we put that symbol of hope into the grimdark future of Warhammer 40k. As always, if you like this and want even more, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and like the video so I know exactly what kind of videos you will want to see in the future. And another grandiose thank you to all my wonderful members and patrons. If you want to know more about the perks and benefits, stick around to the end of the video. For now, let's talk about the Kansas Farm Bowl. Now, picking exactly what variant of Superman to use is a tall order. He's over 80 years old at this point and has appeared in so many comics it would take you months to read them all. So many games and movies and variants that also shift wildly in power. For today, we're going to take a look at the current continuation of Superman in DC, who himself is a kind of conglomerate between pre- and post-crisis on Infinite Earth Superman with a dash of the New 52 in there as well. But where does that land our Superman? Well, the strongest any superhero named Superman could get. A guy who can hold a nuclear bomb shut with his palms. A guy who can outrace photons and punch through planets with ease. A guy who can defy the laws of reality just because his girl is in danger. I'd mention how he can throw a Warlord Titan into orbit or force a craft world to ground, but we all know the man who can tow Earth over his shoulder isn't facing any physical challenges in 40k. Because while Warhammer gets crazy, that's mostly due to scale. Trillions of bodies, millions of space marines, an unending horde of orcs or tyranids that never fail to make pace. For regular humans, yes, it's overbearing, but even the strongest of the demon primarchs who split planets with the help of rituals and chaos aren't facing up physically against a guy who can punch a hole through Terra if he really wanted to. The only thing that can really stop Superman is kryptonite, which doesn't exist in Warhammer. No Krypton, no kryptonite from when it exploded, or whatever origin the kryptonite may have in a given instance. Krypton, the noble gas, does exist in Warhammer as it's a real thing in the real world, but that's just used to make neon signs, and we don't exactly see Superman getting beaten down by the Metropolis skyline or anything like that. And even beyond that, kryptonite, not from his home dimension, even within DC, normally won't bring down supes. So even if they can create or synthesize it within the grimdark future, it wouldn't work anyways. And you might say magic, but that's another loose idea that doesn't really have any steadfast properties. It's more so like he doesn't have any resistance to magic. It doesn't mean that he can't withstand an incredibly powerful magic blast, just that instead of tanking a magical bomb with the force of a dying galaxy, he can only really tank like the force of a supernova. Which, you know, it's still fucking crazy. Otherwise, nothing can make the guy flinch, besides being on the level of punching through a planet strong or putting innocent people in harm's way. And Warhammer 40k definitely has one of those. But we're gonna hold off on the delving into the long list of what Superman has been capable of until they're relevant. For now, let's get right into the far future. Starting off our adventure in Warhammer, we're going to look at the many alien species across the Milky Way. Which ones would accept Clark, which ones would be against him, and which ones he would have to break apart. Now, something to get right about Superman is that he cares for all life. Not just human life, not just Earth life, but life in general. Whether it's a human child, a squirrel, a monster from the depths wreaking havoc, or a rogue sun threatening to devour Soul. Even when they are heinous, Clark wants to offer a second chance to each and every living thing across the universe. That wouldn't be too different here. If there's an alien to be reasoned with, he will. If he can take the time to speak with the Tau, uproot the issues of their brainwashed society, he will. If the Votan need help punching back ginormous asteroids that threaten their spacecraft or come under siege from homicidal cultists, he will help. If the Eldar have a craft world that needs defending, he will show up and protect their right to life, even if they look down upon him while he does so. When looking at Xenos, a lot of people will go off the Imperium perspective of the Eldar being just as xenophobic as they are, which, well sure, the Eldar or any faction of 40k aren't explicitly good, they aren't above diplomacy and talking it out either, the route Clark would go. It just happens to be that the Imperium's survivalist attitude asks them to shoot first and never ask questions, so obviously the Eldar and anyone else just returns in kind. Or the Imperium mistaking Eldar and Dark Eldar, and attacking them as if they're the same. But we know that the Eldar aren't below diplomacy and have even helped the Imperium before. With a mediary who desires peace, I could easily see a Xenos coalition of Votan, Tau, and Eldar created under Clark's watch. Now, the tougher question is how he handles the more abrasive alien species, the Orcs, the Drukhari, the Tyranids, and of course, the Necrons. Orcs might be reasoned with, but they want a good fight. The best Superman can do is try and push their lust for combat towards a greater good, pointing the greenskins at Tyranids and the like. But he may have to give them a fight that would see the Orcs becoming more and more unruly as it went on. Truthfully, it would be bad for the galaxy if either Orcs or Tyranids fought the Man of Steel for any extended period of time. Would the Orcs become Krorks? Likely not. Superman is an immense powerhouse, but the Krorks were a part of a war that used stars as ammunition. While he's incredibly powerful individually, I don't think he would be affecting all of Orc culture across the galaxy to the extent that the species on whole would change. There's just not enough exposure to Clark's power at the scale needed for that kind of momentum to take place. And just as an aside, the Orcs wouldn't kill Superman with the power of belief. That's not how it works. I've seen people say in comments under my similar videos, like against Guardians from Destiny, that the Orcs would just imagine the Guardians are mortal, so boom, they die. That's not how the Orcs' mental aura works. They wouldn't see Clark as a human and just make it so that he's vulnerable to regular bullets. If an Orc thinks a rock is a grenade, it might explode when he throws it, but that same rock in anyone else's hands is just a rock. Orc belief makes their stuff work for them, not against others. They can't imagine Superman mortal and suddenly warp him into one. They're not keeping the Emperor alive with good vibes either. When you hear stories about Orcs believing that someone's immortal and start missing all their shots, it's not because the person is suddenly actually unkillable, it's because the Orcs' own belief throws off their aim, their accuracy tanks, and in their heads, that's proof of invincibility, which to them is kinda the same thing. But if anyone else were to show up and attack that quote-unquote immortal person, they would just stab them in the face. The main mechanic here is that the Orcs are just very stupid and suggestible. When fighting someone who can fly without wings, it might be enough to convince some Orcs that being especially strong grants you flight and take off from there, but it wouldn't work the other way around. But as they come back again and again, another species of doomsday-esque monsters are empowered by every battle they lose against Kent. However, like with Doomsday, Superman is not lost for options when it comes to Orcs and Tyranids. While he is not as smart as the creator in Jor-El, Clark could conceivably rebuild a Phantom Zone projector in the universe of Warhammer 40k. And in fact, he might even be helped by a species that would give him pause in battle. The Necron Empire is dying. For millennia they have sat in silence, rarely stirred and decaying, rotting like a carcass from the inside out. They are splintered, separated, and losing ground between enemies and internal conflicts aplenty. The only reason they've somewhat begun to reconnect is over the Silent King's concern with the Tyranid invasion. As he offers a chance to put Tyranids away and lock up the key, Clark could be the solution to the Necron dynasty's greatest threat, building a portal into the Phantom Zone so that every Orc and Tyranid in the galaxy and beyond could be shoved into a place where they could no longer harm anyone. And if they wanted to fight him themselves, well, I don't think the Necrons would have much that would work on him. People tend to speak about the Necrons in 40k as if they had just got done fighting the war in heaven, but they haven't. Using the stars as ammunition is something they did once, yes, but not something they continue to regularly do. The most powerful weapon we know they have, the Array, is not only kept secret from most of the other Necrons, but rarely used because the dynasty that controls it are worried that it could destroy reality if mishandled. Are the Necrons tough? Yes. Can they wipe out hundreds of humans and severely wreck dozens of Astartes with a single unit? Without a doubt. But we're not talking about a space marine. We're talking about the Superman, a guy who resisted an attack that was coded to his unique genetic makeup, a guy who can bench press planets and shut off any tomb world with a single punch. He cares about life, but mindless automatons is a separate thing. But even still, I don't doubt that Clark would try his absolute hardest to help the Necrons regain their bodies. But if they don't want to work with him for one reason or another, they can go into the Phantom Zone all the same, living out an endless existence in a realm made up of orcs, Tyranids, and an angry death baby somewhere in the middle. Now don't worry, I didn't forget about the Drukhari. For them, Clark has to essentially toss them away into the Phantom Zone all the same. They aren't as open to the idea of diplomacy and take a lot of joy in their cavernous works. But a smaller race of sadist elves is not nearly as much work for the Man of Steel. Even as dangerous as the Eldar can be, Superman would outpunch his way through the whole species. His biggest issue would be Kamara, the dark city of the Drukhari that's hidden in the webway. Not only finding his way there, but existing in a place without any sunlight would severely limit his abilities and might even be stopped entirely from entering. But any Eldar coming out to try and inflict pain outside the webway would be subject to truth and justice for anyone that stands beside the Kryptonian. And for the inside of it, well, his dealings with the Craft Worlds and their mutual hatred for the pirates of the Webway could see Clark and the Eldar teaming up to bring these architects from the Great Collapse to that justice, in the same way his mutual goal in stopping the Tyranids would see the Necrons bridge an alliance with him. For many of the Xenos species, Superman would become a guiding light and a beacon of hope, a reason to fight and a chance for a better tomorrow. Essentially, not that far off from Ben 40,000. But with a league of alien empires, Kent needs to turn his head towards the Imperium. The Imperium of Man in the modern age of 40k is in trouble. Aliens on all sides resent them or want them gone. Chaos has reared its head, more powerful than it has ever been. Half the galaxy, and by extension half the Imperium, is in peril, with the other half being barely held together by Guilliman, while raiding parties from the Tyranids have begun to devour entire worlds. What they need is a savior, a hero, hope. And that's exactly what Superman offers. We know the Imperium isn't against teaming up with Xenos to fight the greater bad. If Clark can organize a meet with Guilliman and the 12 Lords, a new crusade might be able to get off the ground. The Unification Crusade, where negotiation between Clark, Guilliman, the Tau, Eldar, Votan, and maybe even the Necrons would see the more diplomatic aliens across the galaxy somewhat eye to eye in order to devise a plan to handle their greatest enemies so that the remaining societies can divide the galaxy amongst themselves. But only if they agree by mutual consent. Superman can't force anyone to play nice. If they want to hide out in some corner of the galaxy, they'll be welcome to. He's not a god and won't pretend to be, but maintaining peace, or even beginning the road to it, will require Clark to wage the largest war he's ever been a part of. There's not one villain like Darkseid to beat down, but hundreds of villainous aliens across the galaxy.
I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard, always taking constant care not to break something, to break someone.
Anyone not willing to be fair, sabotaging their efforts for peace, or attacking civilians are getting ejected from the coalition, trapped on any number of uncountable prison worlds, or if bad enough, sent into the Phantom Zone with the Orcs and Tyranids. Those who stay, who understand their chance to eradicate chaos and the greater Xenos threats, are welcomed by the Man of Steel as he prepares to bring justice to the galaxy. Now, while smaller Xenos factions are mostly unified and could come together, the Imperium is like 7 other factions on their own, wrapped up in a galaxy-wide trench coat. There's no guarantee they will work with Clark outside of ensuring their immediate survival. At least, not how the Imperium that existed beforehand did. The Imperium that emerges from this war of unity, joining war fronts across the galaxy to aid Alien in arms and fight back against chaos and other threats like the Tyranids, would look in one of 2 ways. The first option, they evolve, a renewed chance of prosperity, hope, future, an Imperium that no longer needs to cling onto their old dogmatic cults like a wounded dog, but one that could break free from its shell and lead the Milky Way into a greater future where Xenos and mankind secure a lasting peace only broken up by localized sector-to-sector wars, rather than firing upon anything and everything that looks different from them. The second option is, they tear themselves apart. From the fanatical Sisters and Templars, to the ever-loyal Custodians and Gilliman's waning pull in the Imperium, Clark is against an entire civilization of paranoid, untrusting, irrational psychotics who have only survived so long because they shoot anything that gets in the way. Not that they'd be able to handle Superman. If it came to, he could fistfight all 10,000 of the Golden Custodians without breaking a sweat. But that doesn't mean that he can beat them all into submission. At that point, the regime would just have to be dismantled because they wouldn't abide by the Xenos coalition. Half the Imperium would collapse again in a second grand heresy, the other half taking on a new name, gaining new allies, advancing with technology, while the old Imperium rots around the core of Terra. Envious and spiteful in its existence, but likely on limited time, a pulse and heartbeat of humanity's worst aspects, closing until it fades into the shadow of stars. But with the mortals of Warhammer taken care of, those who join under the banner of Krypton and Hope only have one thing to contend with now: the great devious powers of chaos. We've talked a lot on this channel about how to beat the great game. From characters that could just rewrite reality into ridding the warp's connection to real space, to others that would beat the Chaos Gods with their own bare hands. Superman would be facing his greatest challenge yet, and the issue of magic comes to harm him first and foremost. As I brought up early on, Superman is not weak to magic, it just happens that he doesn't have magical resistance either. Meaning a plague of Nurgle would be just as dangerous to him as any other creature in the Milky Way. The lash of a bloodthirster or the spells of a changelord would see the Kansas farm boy at his weakest, and if going in without any strong understanding of what he's facing, would end up killing him. Superman, Clark Kent, dead at the face of the worst powers known to all life across the galaxy, across all time, molded by his care for others, and melted by the inane stylings of unknowable, undying, eldritch gods. But there's something more powerful than fists, than the ability to fly faster than light and punch through worlds. Something I haven't brought up, or the failed Supermen, the Superman variants that kill and slaughter when things don't go their way, the Injustice Superman and the like, because they aren't Superman. Clark wouldn't go on a killing spree even after a devastating loss. He'd hide himself away on some far-off rock before he became a megalomaniac. Superman is the ultimate symbol of hope. across mediums, across to other heroes, across the multiverse, here, and across the Milky Way. The Clark Kent we all know and love. The Man of Steel. The man of tomorrow. Superman is that hope manifest. And in Warhammer 40k, that hope is literal. The Chaos Gods are not putting a plague of horror against some random blue-suited farm boy with a heart of gold. They are attempting to smolder the embers of a force for hope so strong, a god whose powers and admiration are all earned through the good and kindness he brings along with him every step of the way. A new contender to the Chaos Pantheon, born not of slaughter or pestilence or change or avarice, but of love. A pure, undying, honest love that cannot be rivaled by carnal lust nor eternal pledge. Call it what you will, the human spirit, the power of friendship, the armor of narrative itself. Superman is that symbol, and in the universe of 40k, he is even greater. The Chaos Gods would not just buckle, but they'd be fundamentally changed by the effect Clark would have on the universe, the undoubtable good he would bring. Truth, justice, and a better tomorrow manifest. Because if it needs to be done, it's a job for... Supes is one of my favorite comic characters of all time. From back when I compared him with the Salamanders to even now with all the love he's been getting since James Gunn's Superman blew everyone away. So obviously this matchup had to come eventually. But I hate evil Superman. I hate the injustice storyline. I hate the unfeeling, boring as chalk Snyderverse Supes. I hate the government tool he was made out to be by Frank Miller. Clark Kent is not a hero because he was born with incredible power. He is not a hero because his parents told him to do so. He's not a hero for the fame or the glory or even the honor of it all. Clark Kent is a hero because every single day he wakes up and becomes Superman. Every single day he sees the best in people and wants to do nothing but use the otherworldly privilege he has to protect the life of Earth and beyond. He's a hero because he can be, because he cares, because if he stands between a single life and the greatest threats to the universe, he will stand in front of that evil with fists clenched and his heart open. And as a giant fan of heroic characters that push themselves to be better and do great things for nothing less than the promise of doing a good deed, he's been a favorite of mine forever. So seeing the Man of Steel made to be some diabolical regime-driven dictator is character assassination to the core. With that being said, we're here to find out, what would a grim dark Superman look like in the war-torn future of Warhammer 40k? Very quickly, I'd like to thank each and every one of my patrons and YouTube members who you can join for just $1 a month, and if you want to hear more about the perks, stick around until the end of the video. Now, this is a sequel to the first video I made on Supes in 40k. Go check that out right here if you haven't seen it. But that video was mainly taking my beloved version of the golden boy in blue tights and turning Warhammer into a Grimhope utopia. Which I still love, of course. But we know what Warhammer is, and it was made by the English, so nobody's ever gonna be able to be happy at any time, or the TV police are gonna come and take away your joy. So, today I welcome all you beautiful ladies and animals as we take all the fun out of Supes and turn him into a scourge amongst the galaxy and turn his want for joy and peace on its head in the future where there is only war. This is going to be less of a power scaling type thing and more of a narrative endeavor on my part, my take on Superman within the world of 40k. See, last time I took the current prime continuity of Supes from DC Comics and basically tossed him into 40k to see how things would play out from there. Today, we gotta go in a different path. But at the same time, I don't want to just use Injustice Superman or another evil variant from the dozens that exist. Today, we're mixing things up by instead having our same Superman from the last episode with all the whack shit crazy things going on in his power set as before, but as if he crash landed on Terra rather than Kansas.
You're from Earth.
I'm not from Earth, I'm from Missouri.
Yeah, that's on Earth, dipshit.
Taking the Red Sun approach with less propaganda and more imperial truth. Not at the same time he's known to come to Earth in M2, but way further along, somewhere around M30, when we know the Unification Wars were being wrapped up as Big E set his sights on the galaxy. Clark Kent, Superman, raised not on a farm but in a wasteland, with the water of Earth long gone and the fires of war being the only thing to comfort him. Of course, there's a few things to clear up first. Would the Emperor even take in this powerful super child? A fucking course. The guy loved taking things far beyond his understanding and control and trying to mold them into the exact tools he needed to complete the Great Crusade. And as it kicked off and Big E attempted to reunite his 20 sons across the cosmos, Superman, Kal-El, would be right beside him. But wait, doesn't the Emperor really hate aliens? There's two ways to answer this. One is that the answer is a lot more nuanced than that. The modern Imperium hates all aliens because it's a part of their 10,000 years of indoctrination. During the Great Crusade, it's more a matter of trust, or distrust rather. The Emperor wants to reunite humanity across the stars. A lot of the aliens who've survived so far have done so by being brutal, backstabbing, raging assholes. The same as humanity, really. So, the Emperor was more keen on just removing anyone that wouldn't have their interests at heart, instead of taking the chance on a few dozen different Xenos races. I mean, we see this with the Interrex, a human-alien coalition that's encountered by Horus, and even the War Master wanted to make them diplomatic allies until they were tricked into fighting one another instead. Fuck Erebus. And the second answer to that is, what is a human? Like, yeah, Eldar, Orcs, Tyranids, Necrons, those are all crazily alien compared to humanity. But looking at Kal-El next to a Ratling, or an Ogre, or any of the Astartes, is he that different from humanity? Or is he more akin to an abhuman? Personally, I think he very much fits into the abhuman category. Now, maybe if the Kryptonian race were all around, they could be perceived as a threat by the Emperor, but a singular child that can be molded into the perfect War Master, whose DNA could be used to create a race of perfected humans, like how Lex Luthor once dreamed the same, that would be prime for the Emperor to make a playground out of. He wouldn't have 10,000 Custodes who were nearly perfect in every way, he would have 10,000 Custodes who were perfect, could fly, fire lasers from their skulls, hear and fly across the galaxy in a matter of seconds, and dominate any physical combat while breaking little more than a sweat. Superman would not just become a welcome addition to the Great Crusade, he could be the blueprint to the Emperor's great plans, the next evolution of humanity. He may even improve upon the failures of Kal's biology, how the Kryptonites need radiation from a yellow sun to be empowered. It could be that the Emperor finds the genetic alterations needed to create another organ for Kal that lets him retain excess solar radiation like a tree before winter, allowing him and any other injected with the Imperial Sun's DNA carry out with immense power even in low-light environments where they would be weakened. Or do the inverse and make Kal into a Custodes-esque super soldier that's fast, strong, and tall, before also being able to fly faster than time and punch through moons like it's nothing. Either way, Kal's introduction and indoctrination into the Great Crusade would be good for him and for the Emperor's forces. And unlike the Thunder Warriors, he'd be more akin to an evolution to keep around to help humanity reach into their psychic godhood rather than being crushed by the galaxy. Or, the Emperor. But there's one issue with replacing the Kent family for the Master of Mankind. He's no father. The greatest strength of Superman is his humanity and his heart. A good Superman I can't see falling for chaos, because in a matter of wills, he'd be resilient for the sake of all, for eons. But a Superman raised by Big E, with the Imperial truth and set out amongst the galaxy so that he could bring far-off human colonies to heal, he'd be at serious odds against the Great Game. The Chaos Gods would lose their sights on a figure like Horus. Why corrupt a demigod when you have a real one to take advantage of? Superman would not become an evil dictator in the way his other variants had become, nor upset with the lies of the Emperor, raised from birth to believe in his cause. But there's one thing that Chaos could show him that would rattle the Man of Steel. The multiverse. All the other lives Kal-El might have lived. The woman named Lois he might have loved. Even the other life where he came to the grimdark universe as a savior, not a tool. Not inspiring him to do good, but enraging him at the state of the Imperium, of the Great Crusade's grand devices. What good is the next evolution of mankind if he's a mere shadow of what he could have been, a symbol of hope, used for wanton destruction? He would not come to resent humanity or the Emperor, but this reality, a pawn tricked under the forces of chaos to become exactly what they needed. A demon prince of incredible power, so much so that he could wage wars single-handedly across the galaxy and beyond. An agent of chaos that would not lead a grand heresy, but instead pick apart the Imperium until it could no longer hold out. Could the Emperor of Mankind smite the Man of Steel once he had been adopted by the Great Game? Maybe. Possibly. Both are so loaded with main character syndrome in their main stories that they're overpowered beyond belief. But if an empowered Horus could do it, Kal-El could kill the Emperor too. But he wouldn't just want to kill Big E. He's too smart for that. He's too fast, and the tactics available to the Kryptonian tyrant who just wants to destroy and spread chaos, he has no need for boots-on-the-ground wars. He doesn't fight in attrition battles. Mars, the epicenter for the Imperium's tools of war, would be broken by a single punch. The Primarchs, the sons of the Emperor who could challenge most mortals in a battle. Maybe the psychics like Magnus could have dealt with Kal-El as himself, but empowered by the Great Game, he'd be unstoppable, speed blitzing every single Primarch across the galaxy, smothering their Astartes soldiers under the weight of their dead brethren before one even has a chance to receive message that he's on the way. Entire battleships cracked in half and fed to the stars, planets and hive cities smashed into one another, eliminating life on a grand scale unlike anyone else in Warhammer could be capable of. By the time he arrived to a world and laid waste to the surface, he would be gone, on to the next. No horde of orcs or oncoming Tyranid fleet could slow him down. The Tau might not even get a chance to survive the warp storm that protected them from the Imperium. At a certain point, the only thing that could stop him in a fight would be the great Necron dynasties, if they even see him coming before a blue bullet smashes through however many tomb worlds without even a warning. All culminating in the halt of the Great Crusade. Primarchs slaughtered, Astartes broken, struggling to face onslaughts of orcs and new cultists who've begun to praise this force of unstoppable chaos. All while Superman, the Evolution, smashes their forces to pieces anytime it seems like the Imperium might get a chance to rebuild. The siege of Terra would look like child's play, and the rest of the Primarchs who also resented their father would take Kal-El's presence in the galaxy as an excuse to turn on the Emperor. The heresy setting off with the Superman as a central figure, inspiring the hatred and rage of those who remain. The only thing that could possibly stop Kal-El waited upon a golden throne, the Emperor of Mankind. In another universe, he'd be fatally wounded fighting Horus. This time, he's facing the most powerful son of Terra. Souped up to the nines by the forces of chaos, faster than time, stronger than weight, looking upon the veil of the warp and grieving about his own future that never was. Superman and the Gilded Master of Mankind colliding for a battle that would end in Terra's destruction one way or another. But the Emperor's greatest failure with Horus was his lack of conviction in battle. He could have killed Horus early, but he didn't. I fear the same thing would happen with Kal-El, even if the Emperor could kill the Superman. Here he was, the shining evolution of mankind, the figure that could have ushered in a new age of gods among the galaxy. turned to the dark forces of chaos, erupting with rage and hatred, fists clenched, soul unwind. Even a nanosecond of fault would be the Emperor's doom, and as the Superman lunged and broke the Master in half, an attack so fast and so powerful it would shatter the Imperial Palace around them, just as an effect of the aftershock. The Imperium would crumble from the inside out. The pylon network Acadia would be smashed, and 10 millennia before it would have come originally, the Man of Chaos would engulf half the galaxy in the Grape Warp blanket that would devour a large swath of humanity. Revenge, hatred, piety, the cause of a Superman without hope, without love. In the grimdark apocalypse of the far future, there is nothing but war, and with a weapon so powerful in such a small package, Kal-El would be the last breath of humanity's attempt before the whole galaxy felt humanity's collapse. The Emperor would survive, he was perpetual, but he would never be so powerful again. His death at the hands of the Superman would be felt around the galaxy. Like the opening of the Eye of Terror, Terra would become a new hole into the fabric of reality. All would shudder. Like the Eldar before them, humanity would be forced into the shadows or die. Always fearful of the Man of Steel, the chaotic angel that could tear apart any survivors without a second thought, hunting down his once brethren for the remainder of his years, constantly rediscovering the Emperor and executing him time after time to make sure the Imperium never has its way and never comes close to the glory it could have once had. I understand why people love the Omni-Man and Evil Injustice Superman archetypes. Hell, Nolan is my favorite character in Invincible. The inversion of the greatest hero, the biggest good, and if turned the greatest threat, is a simple yet solid selling point. It works. Once. After that, it's just kind of boring. Anytime a writer has to brainwash Superman to me, it's a sign that they don't know how to make him interesting, or how to make an effective threat for him that isn't just making him a pawn or changing the character entirely. Probably why Nolan gets away with it, having external motivations. The same thing I try to do here in this video. Now, I think that'll bring our Super Crusade to an end. Welcome all you beautiful ladies and animals. Now, we've talked a lot about different ridiculous versus matchups before, but this one is special, because today we're tackling one of the greatest warriors, one of the most brilliant tacticians, and one of the most absurdly overpowered characters to ever grace pop culture. No, not a Primarch, not the God Emperor, not even an Ultramarine with plot armor in a video game. I'm talking about Batman. And I already hear the responses now. But Batman has prep time, but Batman can beat anyone if he's ready. Batman took down the Justice League. He's beaten Darkseid. He even survived a Death Battle episode. And normally, yeah, okay, in the DC universe, that argument kind of works. But this is Warhammer 40k. You know, the universe where gods are dead but still running the Imperium, where soldiers are mass-produced like Funko Pops, and where Darkseid is kind of just another Tuesday. So today, we're going to go through various Warhammer 40k factions and see just how fast Batman dies to every single one of them. Strap in, Gotham, it's gonna be a rough night. Now, we need some sort of leveled field for Batman. Not all of them are built equally, as the patents in Batman would be floored by Arkham Bats, so we need a unified version of the Caped Crusader to send into Warhammer 40k. Now, when it comes to comics, there's just so much, especially for a character like Batman who has been around for nearly 7 decades. Aside from some cartoon buffoonery like the Lego Batman, or the Adam West has a gadget for literally every occasion Batman,
2 Batburgers, medium rare, and 2 glasses of orangeade.
I wanted to go with somewhere between supernatural and plausible. So for today's video, we're taking the near metahuman Arkham Batman, the guy who's ripping steel grates out from concrete, peeling off electrical boxes and the padlocks that held them shut with one hand, and flying 20 feet through the air just to land one more punch to continue on his combo. But taking it one step further, we're going to give him the Superman pill from Injustice, just so that he isn't instantly obliterated by gunfire. As we know, even Arkham Batman can't take too much from a regular machine gun, and bolters would turn him into a Kevin Conroy-voiced soup. Also because it will play a role. Spoilers for the Arkham games if you somehow haven't had the pleasantries to play these games that are well over a decade old, but here's your warning. But with all his physical strength and the complexities of his suit, this Batman is still going in blind. No knowledge of the universe, no Lucius, no Alfred, no Dick or Drake or Oracle to back him up, no Batwing or Bat-Tank, just the man himself. So without further delay, let's get into it. So let's start with the good guys. Batman, with all his resources, has probably the ability to analyze a single hive world. Even if, say, we drop him in, no random ganger is getting the drop on him, and unlike a character akin to Ben 10 who turns into aliens, a man dressed like a bat isn't that weird for a hive world to raise any major alarm bells. Hell, it's not even a first for 40k. Now, could Batman slowly conquer an entire hive world? Maybe. It depends. If he can do it from the underground, with his experience in Gotham, he could essentially make his own crime family, but instead of crime, obviously it'd be something of more of a intelligence network, slowly overtaking the hive from the inside out. Not unlike the efforts of, say, the Alpha Legion. How long would it take? Who's to say? But it wouldn't be impossible, and it wouldn't even be the first for 40k. Now, here's where the less interesting part comes in, because where does Batman go after converting a whole hive world, if he even can? Say he is successful in building a pseudo-bat planet on one singular world after dozens of years. Now what? He's just one man. The logistical engine that is the Imperium was built over thousands of years. For Batman, he's just not on any timescales that would work for him. Now, if he becomes augmented in the 41st millennium, that's a different story. But to what extent, we can only really guess. Because Bruce is smart, able to bypass complex security systems in seconds with aid from his suit. I don't think it's a stretch to say that he could access Imperial records and information with too much issue. The secrets of the Mechanicus, the information he would need to build weapons and armor on par with the Astartes, likely on patrol in the very system. But I'm not sure what good that would get him. In combat, even with ceramite plating and the super pill, he'll likely be tough enough to take down a few Astartes. It's really dependent on the environment. Close quarters, where he can ambush them, he could take out whole squads. In open combat, he's getting outmaneuvered by entire squads that aren't afraid to use guns. Very high-powered ones at that. The super pills from Injustice are tough enough and can make him near to Superman's strength, but we see clearly in Injustice that even when juiced up, he can get overwhelmed and overpowered. And by the time his coup is unearthed by the increasingly paranoid Inquisitors just looking for an excuse to hold a 3 p.m. execution, he'll have a whole company of Astartes coming down on him. Forget the Custodes or anything above that level, a company of Astartes at full strength will overwhelm Batman. They will trap him in a hive city, and if they can't get him inside the walls, they'll just bring the walls down and tear up the foundations at the root to undo all of Batman's progress. He is one man, and not even fear works on the Astartes. In the grand scale of the galaxy at war, he can be surprisingly powerful at tipping the scales on a single planet. But the Imperium throws away entire worlds like the crappy spoon at the bottom of a cereal box. In the grand scales of the Imperium, he would never be trusted to work within the greater Imperium unless he threw away all his morals in order to do so. Which, in another timeline, he might have, but we know this version of Batman metaphorically died to keep on continuing his near-psychopathic goal of fighting the crime in Gotham, rather than put down the cowl once he was outed to the world. Even in the grimdark of 40k, I don't think he's getting very far, not against the near uncountable number of worlds within the Imperium.
I miss the people we were then. Me too.
Now, one-on-one is a different story. Could a supercharged Batman take on an Astartes? When souped up? Sure. Going toe-to-toe with Superman is not an easy feat and would allow him to take on most of the Primarchs and even Custodes, but almost like Darth Vader from my episode on the Sith, his biggest weakness here is time. In Warhammer, most characters, hell, most side characters, live for hundreds if not thousands of years. Batman's got a good 20 to 40 before his body is too old to do anything substantial. Not without some proper Warhammer-based surgery, which he isn't getting from outside of the Imperium. Now, if there's any faction he definitely doesn't have a chance against, it's the Orcs. They're dumb, they're reckless, and they fight each other as much as they fight everyone else. Unfortunately for Bruce, that's exactly why he kinda just loses immediately. Because Batman is all about fear, and fear doesn't work on Orcs. If anything, Batman just makes them more excited. The moment an Orc sees him jump off a building and glide down like a spooky bat demon, he's not running, he's calling his whole squad.
Oi, look, a zogging bad boy. Bet he hits like a Grajuka.
And before Batman can even finish one cool takedown, 20,000 orcs dogpile him, scream wah, and turn him into Bat Jam. Each individual orc would be like fighting Bane, juiced up on venom, along with a handy helping of weapons and guns that he can't even hack. Unless Bruce is somehow able to convince the orcs that he's immortal by countering and blocking every single attack they throw at him, he's not getting very far against a species that throws moons into planets as an invasion tactic. Could he take out some key principal members? Sure, but entire war bosses and the was that follow them, it's gonna get very overwhelming very, very fast. Alright, let's be real. Batman has fought aliens before. He's got a contingency for the Eldar, right? He's probably got a high-speed AI hacking tool to break into the Craftworld systems. Maybe he's even learned a few anti-psychic countermeasures to resist their mind attacks. Cool. Too bad that none of that matters when the Eldar just kind of see the future and kill him before he even starts. Batman's whole deal is being one step ahead. The Eldar are 100 steps ahead. Before he even begins his perfectly executed stealth infiltration, a Farseer already saw it happen a week ago and sent a ranger to shoot him in the head. And they didn't even need to look up from their poetry recital in order to do it. The thing about the Eldar is they're one of Warhammer's smallest factions, and their kind of ability with warp magic and space magic bullshit is one of the main reasons they've survived the Imperium. So against a single Batman, it's not exactly fair. Oh, and if he somehow survives, the Dark Eldar are going to have fun learning how many pieces a billionaire can be chopped into before he stops screaming. Actually, I kind of think the Dark Eldar would be useful here today. Okay. Let's say Bruce somehow survives into the 41st millennium. Being the ultimate planner, he figures out chaos, he's got a contingency for Khorne's berserkers, a way to counter Nurgle's plagues, a mental block for Tzeentch's trickery, a will strong enough to resist Slaaneish's temptations. In other words, he will think that he's ready. And yet he is so incredibly not. Because when Batman is exposed to the warp, his brain is soup in about 0.02 seconds. You thought Scarecrow's fear toxin was bad? Try Khorne screaming battle hymns directly into your soul. Try Tzeentch throwing you into 1,000 alternate timelines where you die in increasingly hilarious ways. Try Nurgle hugging you and making you melt into a pile of friendly, Batman-shaped rot. Now, could a demon like the one in the secret level episode use his fear against him? Likely not, but he's no Titus either. It would be very much like the Scarecrow part from the end of Arkham Knight where he breaks free of the spell, but once it's back to hand-to-hand combat, even souped up, demons he just can't can't kill, he can't do anything against. What is he gonna do, even super powered with the Injustice Pill, when Angron comes barreling down on him with Khorne asking him to split a planet right beneath the Bat's feet? Prep time? Buddy, the Chaos Guards are prep time incarnate, outside of some wild one-off comic versions of Batman where he turns into a god, like Ben 10 before him. Nothing Batman has, or is capable of, would make him prepared enough to take on the Warp in any meaningful way. They would want him to prepare. They would want him to think that he had a plan. They would want him to walk right into their perfectly orchestrated mind death trap. And just like that, Batman is now a Chaos Spawn, an incredible demon prince of Tzeentch using his vast intelligence to fuck over other people in Warhammer 40k. Congrats DC fans, your favorite hero is now an inside-out screaming horror with bat ears. The only way he can get an upper hand against Chaos is if he gets his hands on Necron tech, but that's not really gonna happen. Oh, and then for Tyranids, he's got anti-Xeno gas, nanoblades, and an exosuit to fight the Tyranids. Cool. A hive swarm numbering into the millions, if not billions, swarms him and tears him apart like a death by 1,000 paper cuts. The only real prep thing he could do to prepare and fight them is target Tyranid leaders, but even the most aggressive and talented of the Primarchs would struggle in a fight against a Swarm Lord. For Batman, even a supersized version would fail to challenge the Swarm. Just like Chaos, it's just too much to handle for one man. Moving on. Now, in the off chance that instead of stubbornly sticking to his values, Bruce shocked up with the Imperium and gave himself to their dogmatic values, could he be the downfall of the regime? Maybe. By logistical means, he'd be up on par with a mind like Gilliman. Would he be lifted to the upper hands of the Imperium at large? Maybe not, but within Ultramar he would be an invaluable tactical asset to Rabute. And with enough time, sure, I think anyone of such a mind who would rather destroy the Imperium than exist alongside it could plunge it into another civil war, creating just enough of a gap for the other factions in 40k to overwhelm the greater Imperium. Look, I love Batman. He's smart, he's strong, he's the undisputed king of pulling plans out of his ass. But in 40k, that just makes him another arrogant upstart who thinks he's smarter than the galaxy's most nightmarish horrors, especially the isolationist Bruce from the Arkham games who refuses to allow his own family to help him unless he's forced to. And in all fairness, most of the reason why Batman loses so much in 40k isn't because he's incompetent or anything, it's just how the rules of the verse are set up compared to the comics. There is no magical kryptonite that suddenly makes Space Marines docile.
My powers! How did you— Gold kryptonite, courtesy of Firestorm.
The only kryptonite in 40k for any foe is just a sufficient amount of firepower. For Astartes, bolters, Tyranids, flamers, Tau warships, a bigger warship. Batman's whole thing of planning ahead and getting people's weaknesses to use against them only works in a world where Superman is afraid of space rocks, the Flash is susceptible to ice, and Green Lantern can't stand the color yellow. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is no kryptonite, just fire, war, and an empty batsuit laying somewhere on Holy Terra because the Emperor thought it looked funny. The only way he's doing anything substantial is if he throws away all of his moral codes and shucks up with the Imperium, but if he has to do that to begin with, then Batman has already lost. So yeah, that's it. Batman loses. Almost always, unfortunately. Hope that clears up the prep time argument for all future debates. taking on one Superman is already an incredible challenge that demands the most complex technology, magical space rock MacGuffins, and a strong sense of plot armor to actually get away with. But this is something that Batman, the one member of the Justice League who doesn't even have superpowers, has been able to do time and time again. But what happens when he comes face to face with the clean-shaven mustache of Omni-Man, or the narcissistic Homelander? Welcome all you beautiful ladies and animals as we delve into a series of kind of lightning rounds, facing Batman up against a litany of Superman clones, not just the evil ones, but others like him as well. As always, if you like this and you want more, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you're here for all future videos, but let's lay some ground rules before we get into it. First off, we need a canonized version of Batman. After 70 years of comics, games, and movies, there are so many different versions of Batman with so many different scales to his power. And for today, we'll be using the Injustice Batman, the one who actually took down Superman in his own suit of hyper-powered armor, and with the help of Lex Luthor was able to produce a performance-enhancing trend that makes him not exactly as strong as Superman, but strong enough to survive a few punches. Spoilers for Injustice, but don't forget, even the Batman who faced this fascist regime-based Superman still didn't kill him, choosing instead to send him into the Phantom Zone. The most extreme threat he sends Soup's way is telling Clark he would turn off his powers with gold kryptonite. God, I fucking hate comic books. So unlike a few other edgy Batmen, Injustice Batman doesn't kill. He doesn't kill psychopaths like the Joker even after he nukes an entire city. And he doesn't kill Clark even after Superman went on to murder dozens of other heroes and world leaders, and even threatened to use Brainiac's technology to subjugate the entire world. But Bruce didn't seem to care. Guess his moral code is more important than saving lives. If I kill just once, I won't be able to stop myself. Batman, your whole thing is self-control and willpower. All you gotta do is murk the Joker once, not go through and execute every psycho in Arkham. But with that established, let's run through some Superman clones, or, Superman-adjacent characters, and see how they can be beaten and figure out if Bruce has what it takes to take them down, without killing them. You ever wonder what would happen if Superman had worse mental health and a built-in self-destruction button? Well, meet Sentry. This guy is basically Marvel's answer to Superman, except instead of a weakness to green space rocks, the biggest threat to him is himself. With the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns, because comic books, like Americans, refuse to use regular methods of measurement, Sentry is the kind of powerhouse that makes even Thor and the Hulk hesitate. But Batman isn't fighting just any version of Sentry, he's fighting the one who flips between heroic Golden Boy and schizophrenic reality-obliterating Nightmare, depending on how bad his day is. So how does Injustice Batman fare against someone whose worst enemy is his own reflection? Well, that's where things get tricky. Sentry is like unbeatable. Technically, the man is immortal, flies around, and kind of just does whatever he feels like. You can see him doing just this in the new Thunderbolts trailer, where the guy just casually shadows people away. Now, how do you fight that? There's the trick question. You don't. At least Batman won't. It takes Thor hitting the guy with Mjolnir when he's begging to be put down to only momentarily take the guy out. Now the lucky part is that Sentry doesn't want to be a bad guy. He would want to be a hero like Batman, but the Void, his darker half, just wants to kind of kill people pretty indiscriminately. Now, for Bruce, he needs to be able to talk Sentry into collapsing the Void without one or either of the schizophrenic personalities turning him into a Kevin Conroy-shaped shadow on the floor. Now, is this something Bruce can do? Maybe. Truth be told, with a problem like this, it's the sort of question that comes down to who's writing the script. How stable is the Sentry? Is he in a good mood? Is he jumpy? Will he give Bruce a chance? Or will he see the dark black armor and ears and assume he's some sort of bat devil here to try and take him on? Bruce has a long list of psychopathic villains he's tried to talk down from enormous cliffs. But this is more than Dr. Freeze or Bane. This is all of them, but also with the power of 100 quintillion joules. Okay, A million exploding suns does sound way better here. But what do you think? Let me know down below if you expect Bruce to have the mindset to take Sentry down from the most explosive edge in comic book history, or if his attempt just turns him into billionaire jelly. Adam Warlock, the golden space wizard who looks like if David Bowie and David the statue had a love child. Unlike our other contestants, Warlock isn't just a Superman clone in terms of raw power, he's a whole different breed of comic weirdness. Created to be the perfect being, which in comics usually means glowing and having way too many philosophical monologues, Warlock's abilities include superhuman strength, energy manipulation, and literal resurrection. Like with Sentry, Batman's usual bag of tricks, gadgets, prep time, and mind games only goes so far. But Warlock isn't just a brute force matchup. He's incredibly intelligent, strategic, and is a whole magical space cocoon that lets him rethink his entire life every time he dies. Basically, he's what would happen if Batman himself had a built-in save file, and was kind of like a god. But again, Warlock isn't inherently a bad guy. He's more often than not a good guy. So Bruce doesn't really need to fight him. But if he did, well, this is where Batman's role in the Justice League is most important. See, despite being number 2, if not number 1 to the Justice League, Bruce isn't doing any of the heavy lifting. He's the plans guy, the smart guy. He could figure out how to beat someone like Brainiac, but he needs the future tech of Cyborg and the absolute muscle of Clark Kent to pull it off. Having a good plan doesn't mean anything if you can't execute it. And unlike Superman, who looks at a chaos gem and falls to his knees, Adam Warlock, along with a lot of the other clones on this list, don't have kryptonite. If you want to keep Warlock down, you need someone strong enough to punch him down. And as a guy who casually wields the Infinity Gauntlet, you need an entire crew of superheroes to outpunch him. On his own, just like Sentry, Batman's only real hope here is to talk it out. Hope that Warlock doesn't toss him into space or turn him into a pile of melted carrot.
Prepare for oblivion into.
Now we go from cosmic enlightenment to an overgrown toddler with laser vision. Homelander is what happens when Superman has zero moral compass, zero humility, and way too much corporate sponsorship. He's got all of Superman's abilities: flight, super strength, heat vision, but none of the restraint. Instead of fighting to protect people, he fights for PR approval ratings. Now, this matchup is interesting because, in theory, Homelander should have every advantage over Batman. He's faster, stronger, and can literally melt faces with a glance. But let's be real, Homelander is arrogant as fuck. He underestimates opponents constantly because he's never really had to fight someone who can outthink him or really outpower him. And that's where Batman thrives. Not only is Bruce so much smarter than Homelander, so much better with PR, and so much better with mind games, but Injustice Bruce would be juiced up just enough that while like the others, Homelander doesn't have a kryptonite, but with the Superman pills he brings along, Batman, the same Batman who goes toe-to-toe with Wonder Woman, Kal-El, Hal Jordan, and others, could actually outfight the Homelander. Because he doesn't have to win, he would just need Homelander to lose, to jump him and make him feel weak, make him feel like the Batman, this strange, unknowable creature of the night, is stronger than him, to prey on Homelander's fear and turn him into a greater mess of a man than he already is. Now, could Batman be strong enough to incapacitate Homelander? Likely. The super pill put him roughly on the same terms as, well, Superman. Alongside an enhanced suit, Homelander is barely strong enough to lift an airplane. Now he's certainly strong, but not Superman strong. If Butcher on heroin and Dean Winchester can beat him up pretty bad, I'm sure Batman, with a much more extensive history of combat prowess, could get one over on him. But it's not just hitting him, it's keeping him down. If in the DC universe, best bet would be to ship Homelander off to the Phantom Zone, where fascist Clark Kent would rip him a new one. But in the world of the boys, Bruce is kind of at a stopping point. He'd have to convince and or help Vought to create some sort of restraint for the planet's strongest toddler. Possible, but much harder than straight up killing him or throwing him to a void with no key. And after just about 2 losses, or more accurate 2 instances of talking it out, I'm gonna give Bruce his first dub against the Homelander. Before we get into this one, and the next, blanket spoilers for nothing major, but yeah. The Immortal isn't the most powerful Superman clone out there, but he does have one key trait that makes this fight more unique. He doesn't stay dead. He's basically the Highlander of superheroes. Cut him down and he just keeps coming back for more. This guy has been around for centuries, fought in every major war, and somehow, despite all of that experience, still gets his head popped like a soda can at least once per season. But let's talk about why this is actually bad news for Batman. Unlike the other fighters, who either outclass him completely or can be outwitted, the Immortal has endurance. He's not... but he will keep coming back, which again, of course, the Immortal is a good guy. He'd be on Batman's side. Hell, he's already got a discount of Bruce on the Guardians of the Globe. But I wanted to throw in the Immortal just as a thought experiment, but unlike the rest of these, the Immortal is one case where Bruce won't really care if he kills the 14th president. As the name implies, he's immortal. Like Ra's al Ghul, no matter how many times the Immortal is ripped apart by a bear, shot in the Ford Theater, or ripped apart by Omni-Man, or even hypothetically put down by Batman, he'll get right back up, but he needs his body parts to be laid close enough to regenerate anyways. And unlike a lot of other examples, in the universe of Batman is basically right at home with a bunch of great value variants of all his buddies from the Justice League. Because, like Homelander, while Immortal is weaker than everyone else on this list, he's still tough enough to give Omni-Man a general challenge, mainly due to his skill in combat, dying and coming back so many times. So likely strong enough and skilled enough to give even an augmented Bruce a decent run for his money, so unless he's got some backup from the heroes of the universe, he's going to be matched roughly right down the middle against Immortal. Oh boy. This is the one we were all waiting for. Omni-Man, the walking, talking genocide machine from... If Superman had zero restraint and a dad complex big enough to cover the entire planet, you'd get this guy. Unlike Homelander, Omni-Man isn't just an unstable man-child, he's an actual trained warrior from a species that conquers planets pretty much for fun. He's thousands of years old and respected wide and far by his own species of genocidal Kryptonians. Batman has fought a lot of superpowered beings in his time, but Viltrumites, that's a whole different league of trouble. He's dealing with a guy who can pulverize entire cities, outspeed anything Batman can throw at him, and most importantly, has no hesitation about killing him instantly. Unlike Superman, there's no talking Omni-Man down. No, but I know there's still good in you moment. This is a pure fight for survival. So how does Injustice Batman approach this? How does he handle someone who isn't going to hold back? How does he try to outthink Omni-Man? Or does he pull out every single ounce of tech, strategy, and desperation to at least just survive? Well, this is where the kryptonite argument from when I threw him at Warhammer comes into play. He can't outpunch Nolan. He can't weaken him with a green space rock or appeal to his humanity. At least when it comes to pre-Chicago Omni-Man for sure. He needs some muscle to carry the weight. Otherwise, well, you kinda get this.
I miss the people we were then.
Me too.
But that's the obvious answer. Now, what we need to know is what happens when Bruce gets his boyfriend. And well, Superman gets his flowers before laying them on Nolan's grave. Yes, Nolan is strong. My man wipes out civilizations on a Tuesday afternoon, but he's the former, the knockoff, the parody. Superman, Clark Kent, he's the comic book hero. Kal-El's strength is infinite. If he hits Nolan and Omni-Man blocks it, Kent is just gonna hit him harder, especially an older, matured Superman working alongside Batman. Without kryptonite, there's nothing that Omni-Man could do to even harm Clark. Could he throw him around, the two going at it a little bit? Yeah. Nolan's probably even a better fighter, considering a lot of his martial prowess includes fighting people that are more on his level. But Superman pulls planets. That whole Viltrumites crack through a planet thing I've shown off in a few different videos about now? Yeah, that's like middle of the road in terms of difficulty for Superman. Skin peeling off of Mark and Thrag as they fight in the sun's core, doing that would just make Clark stronger. Nolan is a powerful fighter and one of the strongest Viltrumites in the universe. But Clark Kent is the original, the Superman, the traditional Boy Scout whose strength of purity and honesty is almost as strong as his fists. Now, the two combined with Kent's lungs and Bruce maybe putting together the fact that Omni-Man would be weak to sound, they wouldn't really need it. Superman is faster, stronger, and more durable when switching blows against Omni-Man, no matter how tough he may be to those way below him. Now against just Bruce, even if he figured out the sound weakness, something that was discovered in the TV show really by accident, Omni-Man sweeps. He's tantamount to a force of nature. Just like Darkwing, Batman would go...
Also, I meant to include it and I totally forgot. Metro Man, obviously, one of the most famous Superman clones. I'm not going to speak on whether or not he beats Batman, because we kind of know how that goes. But I will say, Metro Man slams the entire Warhammer 40k universe. That's it. Bye.
So, you're the punk I've heard about.
So like many of Batman's own rogues gallery, taking on these gods among men is less a case of outpunching them and instead outthinking them, making peace with them and appealing to their better judgment. Except for Nolan, there's not a lot he can do there, but that's mainly because of a thing I echoed in the video about Batman in Warhammer 40k. Batman's whole thing of planning ahead and getting people's weaknesses to use against them only works in a world where Superman is afraid of space emeralds, Aquaman is useless on the surface, and Green Lantern still can't stand the color yellow. Against characters like Nolan, Homelander, or Century, there is no magical cure-all for their abilities. It's not something Marvel and a lot of other comics, especially more contemporary ones, tend to do. But he's still smart and still a valuable member of the Justice League, even if he's not doing all the heavy lifting. Fine. What's another 17 months? I can always start again. Make a new channel. Superpowered soldiers of a regime that conquers stars, grasps the hands of gods, and outlive the civilizations around them with intense and powerful technology, back-ended by a series of soldiers who can single-handedly take on entire planets. Now, this description can be levied against pretty much every faction in the grimdark future of Warhammer 40k, but it's also very fitting for the Viltrum Empire. Welcome all you beautiful ladies and animals as we delve into the Viltrumites of and how they would handle existence in the far future. Now, this is a bit of a repeat. Way back in my first Throwing Random Characters at Warhammer 40k video, the Viltrumites were thrown at the Imperium. But only the Imperium, and to be fair, a lot of the points I made in that video were either a little underinformed or badly explained, which led to a lot of confusion about them in the comments. But today, we now have a rerun. Instead of just pitting the warriors of Viltrum against the Imperium, we're going to be putting them at odds against the rest of the Warhammer universe, from Chaos to Tyranids to Orcs and all the rest. Kinda like asking if they could exist in the 40k verse and hold their own against these insane factions. As always, if you like these videos and want more, be sure to like and subscribe so you're here for the next one. But without further ado, let's dive back into the Viltrumites. Seeing as we've gone over Viltrumites in their immense strengths before, there's going to be some repeats if you've seen that past video, but I'm going to go quickly through their capabilities so we can get into what you actually came here for. And of course, this kind of goes without saying, but spoilers ahead for the very end of the comics. Nothing specifically about the story is going to come up, but some situations and some actions taken by characters are going to be used. So be warned if you're excited to see the end of the show whenever it's finished in 2094. So, Viltrumites are powerful, immensely. The main plot of Season 3 in the show is the government basically coming to terms with the fact that himself is pretty much unstoppable compared to what they have, and he's one of the weaker Viltrumites, at least for the time being. But we've got a lot of feats for Viltrumites in the show, from Nolan's escapades on an alien world in the first season, where we see him single-handedly drop mountains on cities Ultron style,
Earth isn't yours to conquer.
to flying so fast that he heats up the air and on collision with buildings effectively sets off a chain reaction of nuclear explosions in the middle of a city. And on that topic, a concept that wasn't explained in my last video that featured Viltrum, because in all honesty, I didn't even comprehend it at the time, was the maximum speed of Viltrumites, which can range anywhere from just below the Red Rush, to cruising through multiple galaxies within months, or faster than light. And the truth seems to be less so that they're ever limited, but more so that the speed of a Viltrumite, like everything they do, is exponential in degree. If someone like Nolan wants to move 10 feet, he could do it fast, yeah, but not at his maximum potential speed. Now, crossing galaxies, he's got a runway of sorts, a lot of open space to build up speed and exponentially go from a few thousand miles per hour to millions, if not more. So the grander the scale, the faster the speed. But the shorter scales, while still fast, they won't get so fast that the air around them lights on fire, unless they just orbit around the Earth like we see Mark do in Season 3. Now for strength, well, like I said, we see Nolan punch through buildings. A young Invincible's face is used like a set of brakes on the subway, lifting mountains and punching holes in entire moons, splitting them in half, probably the most intense force we've seen in the comics. Comparing this to 40k, the most we really see from individuals was Angron splitting a planet. But that was also with a super helping of Khorne's hate boner rage juice doing most of the heavy lifting for him. But that's not even the strongest we see. In Season 2 of the show, we watch Nolan drift just at the edge of the event horizon on a black hole, without being sucked in, contemplating suicide. Now, it's a lot to escape a black hole. There's entire movies about this shit. But Nolan didn't even try. He was almost welcoming it. Now, he didn't get close enough to go beyond the point of no return. It's clear enough that even black holes aren't of a big deal for Viltrumites. And at the end of the comic series, we see Mark and Thrag fight on the surface of the sun for a few minutes and are still pretty much okay. And that's another important thing to note. If a Viltrumite gets away, they're going to heal. And they're going to come back stronger and with the knowledge of how you beat them, and then that's how they beat you. If you don't finish them off when you have a chance, you're never getting a second chance. The last thing is numbers. Now, as revealed in the comics in the most recent season of the show, there's a lowly 50 Viltrumites left. While some interbreeding with inferior species is worthy of execution, like Nolan's bug baby, we know species similar to Viltrumites like humanity is an acceptable replacement. As an infiltrating force with an abundant number of endless, uncountable hive worlds in the Imperium, there's planets literally made just to repopulate the Imperium's front lines. We could see an uprising of hundreds, if not millions, of Viltrumites in the matter of a few decades. Because unlike a lot of characters we've thrown at 40k like the legendary Darth Vader or Batman who only live one human lifespan, if not a little longer, Viltrumites live for thousands and thousands of years, outpacing some of the most legendary Astartes like Titus, and even up to the 10,000 long lives of the Primarchs. So while it was an issue in the show, with a singular Earth to pick suitors from, the Warhammer universe is just teeming with human lives, very expendable ones at that. Oh yes, Tyranids, because nothing says fair fight like throwing an entire intergalactic swarm of ever-adapting, all-consuming bio-horrors against a race of superpowered warlords who think that diplomacy is just punching slightly less hard. The Tyranids, however, are not just a threat, they're the threat, a never-ending tide of flesh and claws, stripping entire galaxies bare like a cosmic horde of locusts with better teamwork. A species so grand and vast that they whipped the king of the Necrons back into shape after seeing their fleets. Unlike your standard alien invasion, there's no negotiating with the Tyranids, no intimidating them, no "this isn't your world" speech that makes them hesitate. They don't get scared and they don't get tired. They don't stop unless they just run out of food. Now, the fights between Viltrumites and Tyranids are going to depend on how domineering the Viltrumite DNA is in comparison to the genetic manipulation of the Tyranids. Because the Viltrum DNA is so strong and pure that even a child like Oliver, Omni-Man's second son born to the mantis-like species of Thraxans, appears to be entirely Viltrumite apart from his aging and purple skin. So if Tyranites tried to bleed a Viltrumite and take their blood, likely they'd be overwritten and forming humanoid babies in their leviathans. But that's if the Tyranids did nothing and let life go on as normal. Tyranids aren't normal. Each being on a fleet is an amalgamation of hundreds, if not thousands, of microorganisms subsumed to create the perfect organisms. Likely, they would be the first to turn the Viltrum DNA on its head, taking the good parts for themselves and removing the humanoid loyalty to the Empire from it. So instead of an army of unwitting Olivers, you get an army of Tyranid warriors who don't need claws, or biological guns, or wings, but ones that can fly, are incredibly durable, and are birthed by the millions upon every world they land on. Where the Viltrumites are coming short with just 50 members, the Tyranids create millions each day. Basically, with the pure numbers advantage, Tyranids with Viltrumite blood would conquer the Warhammer universe in about a year. Now this is where things get messy. A full-scale war between the Viltrum Empire and some of Warhammer 40k's most colorful factions is less of a who would win, and more of a who gets bodied last. The Orcs. Oh yes, the ultimate stress test for any would-be galactic conqueror. The Viltrumites think they love war, but they have nothing on the Orcs. The more you fight them, the stronger they get. The stronger they get, the more they fight you. But you can nip the problem in the bud before it gets too bad. This has been the Imperial strategy since the War of the Beast. And with soldiers who crash through moons and veterans that can wipe away entire civilizations, as long as no singular Wa is able to grow to the level that it can challenge a single Viltrumite, the Empire should have little struggle trimming the edges in the same way the Imperium does. Now, if they let it grow out of order, you've got a situation on par with the Ragnar, but now intergalactic and throwing the same moons that the Mites would have to punch their way around. Now here's a fun one. Unlike some Viltrumites, the Tau don't just rely on brute strength. They have tactics, advanced tech, and something Viltrumites hate dealing with: range. Super strength doesn't mean much when you're getting pelted by railguns from across the battlefield. But can the Tau actually adapt fast enough to hold out? Probably not. The Tau rely on fast-moving ambushes to overwhelm and outspeed an opponent before they have a chance to react. Not only do veterans like Nolan move incredibly fast and attack in much the same way, but when put on the back foot, there's no proper way to defend yourself from a Texas-sized rock landing on a Supremacy warsuit. Their best bet is to run away and reorganize, as they often do. But it's hard to do that when single Mites can fly faster than any of their battleships and would be capable of ripping through their hulls all the same. These knife-eared space elves have spent millennia surviving worse threats than Viltrumites. Between their speed, precognition, and ridiculous psychic powers, the Eldar have a way of making even the strongest warriors look like complete amateurs. But could they actually kill enough Viltrumites before being overwhelmed? This is all going to be about strategic moves on their part. Whether the Eldar make good of their future farsight to catch any Viltrumite warriors off guard and prepare way in advance, or if Viltrum can hit their small number of craft worlds too fast for even the elves to react, this is kind of tilted towards the Viltrumites. As far as we know, a tactical deployment of Viltrumites would splatter a craft world into bits, even with the foresight of knowing it's coming on the Eldar's part. You can see a freight train coming from a week away. It doesn't change the fact that you can't stop it from turning you into elven jelly. The closest thing 40k has to space dwarves, except these ones are terrifyingly efficient and run by massive ancient AI supercomputers. They don't rush in screaming like orcs, they don't rely on faith like the Imperium, and they don't get overwhelmed by emotions like the Eldar. They just analyze, strategize, and eradicate. But is that enough when you're dealing with a foe that can punch through your starships? No. Considering that the Votann are just sort of a smaller, literally shorter version of the Imperium, but they're also much more isolated. Actually, considering that Viltrum prefers to conquer than straight out destroy, it's possible that their shared DNA with humans, that the Votann, unlike any of the other inferior aliens in 40k, might be subjugated and allowed into their empire, rather than just being wiped off the map anytime the two interact. In fact, this is likely the best case scenario for any of the alien species in 40k. Aside from the orcs or Tyranids who refuse to work with them, the Viltrum Empire might actually make the Tau, Eldar, and the Votann even stronger by forcing them into a coalition under their iron fist. Alright, let's be real. This is where Viltrumites start to realize they might have messed up. Fighting Tyranids would be bad enough. Dealing with orcs is a little exhausting. But the Necrons, this is a completely different nightmare. You see, Necrons aren't just an empire. They're a corpse-dormant god-tier doom machine that's been waiting for the perfect moment to reawaken and remind the galaxy that they were here first. They're what the Mass Effect Reapers thought they were. Imagine an entire civilization of unkillable, self-repairing deathbots with faster-than-light weaponry that ignores durability. The kind of ancient spite that makes the Viltrumite arrogance look downright modest. Viltrumites thrive on physical dominance. They break people's will by proving they're unstoppable. But what happens when they punch a Necron and it just gets back up? Again and again and again. Even worse, the Necrons are led by literal gods, with the kind of reality-breaking technology that makes the Viltrumites' empire building look like a high school wrestling team trying to take on the NFL. The moment the Necrons decide the Viltrumites are a problem, it's not really a war, it's more of a mass execution. So the real question, like a lot of matchups with Necrons, isn't can the Viltrumites win? It's a kind of question of how many tomb worlds can they destroy or limit the scope of before the Necrons wake up and unify their forces across the galaxy. Because for all their strength, the Necron Empire at its peak is also like Viltrum at its peak. A series of unstoppable conquerors hell-bent on making the galaxy in their image. And unlike a lot of other strangely powered soldiers of 40k, the Necrons can actually see, understand, and react to the Viltrumite attacks at the speed of light. Although at the same time, the arrival of the Tyranids nor the explosion of half the galaxy hasn't been enough to awaken all the Necrons just yet. So if they move fast enough, the Viltrumites wouldn't be up against the entire unified empire. Their biggest problem would really be time distortion. Hard to fight back when you get locked into a Pokeball. So far, all the other matchups have a certain logic to them. Even the Tyranids, as terrifying as they are, have predictable biological rules. They still gotta eat. But Chaos doesn't care about rules. Chaos doesn't fight fair. Chaos doesn't fight at all. It corrupts, twists, and laughs in the face of everything you thought that you understood. And with the way that the Viltrum Empire is bloodlusted and with no protection from magical abilities whatsoever, something that just doesn't come up during... The Viltrumites are most susceptible to chaos above the rest. They can rip cultists and space marines in half by the truckload, sure. But Nurgle has remedies 100 times worse than the Scourge virus. Khorne will use their own combat prowess in Spartan-esque honor code to turn them into demon conquerors of the Black Crusade. Slaanesh will take their strives for perfection and Darwinism into the extremes and make them into mass subjugators. And while a Viltrumite, especially a strong one like Nolan, could probably fight and beat a demon prince like Ingron time and time again, Khorne's sight will fall upon them both, bathing the fighters in the endless red lust of combat until one or both of them fall deeper into the dark embrace of the laughing gods. But no one in 40k can defeat chaos in the Viltrum Empire is no exception. Even without striving for total elimination, just fighting chaotic forces in skirmishes all across the galaxy will lead Viltrum to its highest rate of casualties since the Scourge virus nearly wiped out their species. Depending on the Chaos Gods and depending on if their will of superiority wins out over chaotic corruption, facing the warp and all its horrors will either be the thing that undoes the Viltrum Empire, or makes it unkillable and unstoppable enough to properly take on the 40k galaxy. And if they're repopulating with the many millions of hive worlds, that's likely gonna be the trajectory they go down anyways. But instead of one random factory worker learning he can shoot lightning and being spleed blitzed by a Grey Knight, it's some poor alternate reality version of Mark Grayson accidentally punching that Grey Knight in half before growing massive spikes and turning into a bloodlust demon, just aching for his next feast. So there you have it. The Viltrum Empire across nearly all of 40k, rather than just the Imperium of Man. And yeah, it's either going to be really good for Chaos, or really good for Tyranids. Or both. Let me know. We've covered a lot of different franchises in comparison to Warhammer 40k. How strong are they? Could they fight back against the laughing gods? And do they stack up to the endless armies of the grimdark future? But today, something new, something different. While a few factions from other series could have teamed up with various factions in 40k, like the IMC, Viltrumites, or Helldivers packing up as a part of the genocidal Imperium to spread righteous fury, today we're looking at an ally, or perhaps curse, from within. Today, all you beautiful ladies and animals, I ask you, what would the Imperium of Mankind look like if the X genes suddenly appeared? So join me as we go over the abhumans of 40k and compare them to the many mutants of the Marvel Universe. But before we dive in, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you like videos like this and want even more in the future. And without further ado, let's get into it. As per the Warhammer Lexiconum, in an Imperium where genetic mutation and spiritual corruption are often interrelated, abhumans are a focus of much controversy. In more liberal times under the Emperor, even markedly divergent abhumans such as the Beastmen could serve in the Imperial Guard and Militarum Auxilia. Since the Emperor's stasis, however, only the lesser deviants, such as Ogrins and Ratlings, are considered Imperial citizens. However, they are still distrusted by the more Puritan members of the Inquisition. From the recognizable Ogrin, essentially ogre humans, to legally distinct hobbits in the form of Ratlings. Abhumans are still human, just mutated enough to classify as a different species. An ogre next to any guardsman, genetically, is like plopping down a Saint Bernard next to a corgi. Both dogs, both canines, but very, very different and used for different purposes. Most abhumans are allowed as long as they are useful. Roughly, if they have 2 legs, 2 arms, a head, and 2 eyes, the Imperium gives them a discerning glance, but allows them to be citizens. Not that being an Imperial citizen is any great honor, but it's better than having Grey Knights dropped on your head. But it does mean, depending on the aberration, the Imperium, or more specifically the Inquisition, would be more or less accepting of them, with obvious examples like the Beastmen and even the Wolfen from Fenris under incredible scrutiny, whereas the Ogrin are pretty much an accepted member of the Imperial cult. Now, abhumans are known and separate from what the Imperium defines as mutants. In 40k, Mutants are either humans touched by chaos, those transformed by demons, or ones such as the Gene Stealers, modified. Mutants are not born as such, they are made to be mutant later in life, a one-off creature, not a species with a tangible, expected amount of genetics. This definition is important because in Marvel, the way the term mutant is used is retained exclusively for members of humanity who carry the X gene, or the thing that makes mutants, versus those who are mutated later in life, like the Spider-Man or Bruce Banner, who they call mutates. In the context of Warhammer, Marvel's mutants are more akin to abhumans, but draw the line at some points into mutant territory. Still human with a genetic change, a general mutation that can be passed down through children. Now, instead of looking like rat people or human-shaped ogres, the X gene manifests in laser eyes, bone claws, or control of magnetism. But whether or not they're allowed at all will depend on the Inquisition that identifies them, as each mutant, especially those who possess powers that are similar to the psychic manifestations of the Warp, will probably be accused of heresy first. But let's get into the mutants. A man with unbreakable bones, claws, and a healing factor so good that it makes the Astartes jealous sounds like an Ogren with extra steps, but does Logan's animalistic nature help him or hurt his chances of being human enough? As our first example, Wolverine's mutation isn't even that crazy for 40k. He's actually not far off from the Wolfin, but he could still totally blend in with others around him. He looks human, he acts human, he's just faster, stronger, heals, and has claws. Likely, he wouldn't even be too much of an outsider, as there's so much craziness in 40k that would make someone like Logan fit right in. As for the Greater Imperium, he would likely just be regarded as a specialty kind of human, if not even applicable for Space Marine training. Although whether or not he could have the extra organs implanted would be the greater question here. Stronger and more fit than regular humans from the beginning, and basically a super soldier before any augmentations. But he's still fairly human, and unless Logan turns into a crazy rogue agent and rebels from the Imperium, there's a great chance he's allowed to just continue as normal, fighting forevermore in the grimdark future. This mutant is approved for service. A smooth-talking rogue with explosive playing cards, Gambit's flashy powers might be a hard sell, but his skills and charm would make him a perfect candidate for an Imperial assassin, if they didn't brand him a psyker first. Taking basically anything and charging them up with a pink glow, while Raimi still appears to be human on the surface, unlike Logan's purely physical abilities, the Gambit's more magical card tricks would set off red flags for the Inquisition immediately. Now, under the assumption that a mutant like Raimi isn't instantly executed because the Inquisition would rather kill now and maybe ask why later? But if they decide not to do that, he's going to be scrutinized incredibly for chaos corruption and would have to spend nearly every day of his life atoning for the sin of being born differently. Possibly fighting on the front lines, perhaps being tortured upon an Inquisitor's ship. Either way, the deck is handed to him, the Gambit is drawing a blank. This mutant requires repentance in the field. Teleportation, blue skin, and a prehensile tail. Nightcrawler has more in common with a sanctioned mutant than an abhuman. But could his piety and devotion to faith win over the ecclesiarchy, or would they just mistake him for a demon? Likely, between the powers and appearance, Kurt is getting the true demon treatment. Now yes, he's devoted to outdated 21st century faith, but that's not in line with the Imperial cult. And if Gambit was testing the line, this is a mutant that gets shot first, with questions never coming after. Maybe in a more liberal Imperium under the Emperor, Wagner and those like him would be more acceptable, but in the 41st millennium where paranoia is king, the Nightcrawler is getting labeled as a mutant and sanctioned for execution. This mutant may feel the Emperor's mercy. An unbreakable steel body and the heart of a loyal warrior, Colossus seems like an easy fit for a sanctioned abhuman. But does his transformations make him too unpredictable? Like Ogryn, Colossus is still very human on appearance, and while different when transformed, the backbone of the X-Men is still a powerhouse. Likely used for his strength and abilities much the same as Wolverine, the Colossus is mainly a physically mutated mutant, so them keeping him around to use as a weapon, there's a pretty good chance for that. This mutant may serve on the front lines. A powerful psychic with the ability to control minds? Yeah, there's no way the Imperium will let this one slide. The real question is, would they make him an alpha-level psyker asset, or just execute him on sight? Now, the main thing is whether or not Xavier would be able to resist the warp. As we've seen with other telepaths in 40k, the most powerful among them always seem to fall to chaos, or they're the Emperor. There's a few ways they deal with someone who has the psychic abilities of Xavier. Likely, none of them good for him, because even with his latent psychic abilities not derived from the corruptive force of the warp, the Imperium refuses to acknowledge nuance. They will treat him as a psyker regardless. With his wisdom, he may become a type of communicator, basically a magical telephone for the Imperium, or he gets strapped in a prison and is tested for corruption. Or he's simply put on a black spaceship so that his soul can be fed to the Emperor in order to keep the Astronomicon powered for at least a day longer. This mutant is being placed in the hands of the Inquisition. Weather control on a planetary scale. That's straight into Living Saint territory, but would Storm's mutant status overshadow her godlike abilities in the eyes of the Imperium? Now, like many of the others, she'd have to be tested for corruption, but with an immense power set that turns entire armies of metal giants to scrap, her abilities proving to make her into a one-woman army unlike anything else. Unlike the Professor, whose psychic powers are a dime a dozen in the Imperium, Storm's more unique flavor of destruction would make her a valuable asset for the Imperium. While still regarded with skepticism and the highest levels of scrutiny, Storm would be like an attack dog for the Imperium, strategically deployed across worlds, shredding their enemies to pieces before being retrieved and kept for the next battle. This mutant will serve the Emperor's angels well. A leader, a tactician, and a man whose eyes shoot death beams. If the Imperium could harness his power, he'd be a walking artillery unit. But is controlled destruction enough to make him an abhuman, or is he just another mutant threat? Obviously, Scott is human to the core, and while his eye beam is out of the ordinary, it is still one of a kind and incredibly powerful. Adopted into the Imperial Guard, he'd be a powerhouse, cutting down enemy tanks and vehicles and even splitting Space Marine Terminators in half with his laser so powerful, he can softly land with it. If you don't understand why that's so impressive, watch a Hank Green video. This mutant is good for the front lines, an effective weapon. Now, what happens if he falls behind enemy lines? What if the Sons of Fulgrim came upon him, trapped him, and dragged him down to the lair of Fabius Bile? Legions of Noise Marines empowered with the eyesight that matches stars. What then? What the... Hyper-intelligent, physically powerful, and covered in blue fur, Beast could slot in as a sanctioned bioengineer or even a Jokero-adjacent tech specialist if the Imperium doesn't just see a dangerous mutant in need of a bolter round. Like with the others of the X-Men who take on a more unconventional appearance, Beast's reception among the greater Imperium will be greatly determined upon who he is sanctioned with. The hateful Sons of Dorn who crusade all millennia around? He would be put down. A heretic, a mutant. No matter how smart he may be, the Imperium is fine with wiping away one mind if it means they are one body closer to a cleansed galaxy. Now, among the Salamanders, in Ultramar or perhaps with an Inquisitor who favors the well-spoken Blue Beast, he could find his way into the Imperium at acceptable levels. As a specialized squadron of mutants who are smart but also handy in tight spaces and incredibly strong would make him an invaluable asset for data recovery and general maintenance among Mechanicus facilities. This mutant will serve the Omnissiah well. Control over magnetism and a philosophy that echoes both the Imperium's worst fears and deepest truths. Magneto is powerful enough to rival some of the Imperium's greatest weapons, but would his ideology make him a revolutionary, or just another heretic? Now, there's two ways to do this, and I've kind of skirted the line across the rest of the X-Men so far. Are we taking Eric from the Marvel Universe and planting him into 40K, or are we making a new Eric, one who was born among the hive worlds of the Imperium? Well, as the nature of this video entails, I'm going to run this as the latter. And of course, as often we see, Magneto is strong to levels untold of even the 40K universe. The master of magnetism lifts entire stadiums, entire bridges with nothing but his strength, and that was even in his old age. His control of metal is so precise that he can disassemble multiple firearms all at the same time, making mechanical weapons inert. So specialized that even digging the iron out of someone's blood is a threat to all around him. Now, in the event of an Eric being born in 40K, if not scrutinized as an unsanctioned psyker, his anti-discriminatory character would be revealed in the paranoia and hate of the Imperium. The Imperium, who are so vividly based on the same systems of paranoia and vibrant oppression that would have killed all his family and tortured his memories for years in the prime timeline of his life. When trading one fascist regime for another.
Bigot. Ingrate. Sycophant. Worm. Small, I could smite you with a step.
Faced with an empire built on oppression and the ruthless extermination of those deemed impure, Magneto would not kneel, not to the Ecclesiarchy, not to the Inquisition, not to the Golden Corpse that held the galaxy in its rotting grip. No, Magneto would do what he has always done, rally the outcasts, the discarded, the ones deemed lesser. On any one of the millions of smog-choked hive worlds, the birth of a legend begins. A world of endless forges, sprawling underhives, and towering spires where the wealthy exploit the downtrodden, ripe for revolution. It starts small, whispers among the laborers, missing patrols, Arbites officers found hanging in the air, choked by their own breastplates, their weapons dismantled into their base components. Then, it escalates. The manufactoriums grind to a halt. Trains derail mid-transit. Tanks rip themselves apart before they ever leave the armory. The planetary governor's palace crumbles under its own weight as the very metal beams holding it together twist and shift like living serpents. The few Astartes stationed on the planet find their power armor turned against them, servos locking, helmets crushing inward, bolters melting in their gauntlets. And above it all, floating high in the smog-filled sky, he watches. A crimson-cloaked specter, arms outstretched, eyes burning with righteous fury. The Imperium, of course, will not stand for this. The Inquisition declares him Homo extremis, a mutation so dangerous it warrants immediate extermination. An entire fleet is mobilized, led by a force of Grey Knights, ready to burn the hive world to the ground if it means wiping out Magneto, who they deem as a psyker beyond control, and his growing rebellion alongside it. But Magneto is no fool. He would have been prepared. Defense grids turn against their masters. Battleships in orbit suffer catastrophic failures as their own hulls warp and twist. Even the mighty Astartes find themselves struggling as their armor and weapons betray them. For a moment, just a moment, the Imperium trembles. But Magneto is not a god. Even he cannot stand against the full weight of the Emperor's will forever. The forces of the Imperium will push back. The war will turn against him. Yet, even if he falls, even if his body is burned to ash in a holy purge, his message will remain. You are not weak. You are not less. You are the future. And the future will not be shackled. This mutant is the Emperor's nightmare. So, like the many abhumans before them, these mutants are something different, a deviation, an exception, maybe even an evolution. And for a moment, they shine. Maybe they rise above their station, carve out an empire, prove they are more than just another footnote in the Imperium's archives. But this is Warhammer, and in Warhammer, nothing lasts. Because no matter how powerful a mutant becomes, whether they're moving mountains with a thought or bending entire hive worlds to their will, the Imperium doesn't care. The boot always comes down. The Inquisition will burn them as heretics. The Guard will drown them in bodies. And the Astartes, well, they'll do what they always do. Eradicate anything that doesn't fit the Imperium's perfect, rotting vision. In the end, they're not saviors. They're not rulers. They're not even monsters. They're just another failed experiment in a galaxy that only tolerates the status quo. Looking back at a lot of the different superhero-based matchups I've covered on the channel, from Viltrumites to the Kansas Farm Boy, one sci-fi hero faction has always been on my mind, as they're an actual army, or fighting force of sorts, and in direct opposition to Warhammer's existence on an existential level. In brightest day or blackest night, beware their power not. The Green Lanterns are not the Lantern Corps we're looking at today. I know, I kind of pulled the wool over your eyes with that thumbnail and title. See, while Warhammer carries a lot of genocidal factions, most don't actually want to kill everything. The Tyranids need stuff to eat, the Necrons want to restore their biological bodies, Chaos likes to fuck around, and Orcs, well, they're just here for the love of the game, and if there's nobody to fight, then there's no game to play.
Yes, science!
Even though they'd happily wipe out each and everyone across the galaxy, no faction wants to scrape the Milky Way clean of life in totality, aside from a few crazy elves. So, rather than infecting them with rage or willpower or greed, we're going to be looking at the very edgy, very fitting Black Lantern Corps, otherwise known as the Zombie Lanterns of the DC Universe. So, welcome today, all you beautiful ladies and animals. Real quick, I want to thank my members and patrons who make a lot of this possible, who you can join and don the oath beside for just $1 a month. But with that, let's get on with the video. In the very beginning, there was nothing. An endless, eternal blackness that consumed what nothing of reality didn't exist yet. Then came a light, a bright, smothering light that forced this never-beginning darkness into shadow. The clash of the two drove a wedge of despair between the spectrum of light, shattering brightness into the many faces of the lanterns we know today. The most famous being the Green Lantern Corps, who vow to protect life and fend off oppressors from those who cannot help themselves, driven by their own willpower and aptitude to never back down in the face of overwhelming odds.
Beware my power! Green Lanterns, light!
There are Yellow Lanterns who feed on fear, using their enemies' greatest failures against them. Red Lanterns drawn in by rage, whether built from betrayal or galvanized in conquest. Blue Lanterns are powered by hope, that feeling you got when walking out of James Gunn's Superman movie. Violet is love, indigo is compassion, then orange, a singular ring for a whole core representing greed and avarice, the perfect artifact for a beloved Necron artisan. Basically, all the spectrums of the light, which create the Lantern Corps, represent different aspects of emotion. But like with Warhammer's own Chaos Gods, this isn't purely a good versus bad thing. Green Lanterns typically fight against evil, but their power comes from willpower. Just because they're space cops doesn't mean that they're also going to be better behaved than, well, real cops. Red Lanterns are fueled by rage, but sometimes that's a warmongerer, where other times it's a house cat who lived the worst possible life and is probably a little justified in wanting to pulverize a group of teens. Then, in a mythical combination under specific circumstances, you also get the White Lanterns, a combination of all the aforementioned emotions for total inner peace. And on the flip side, the Black Corps,
who seek not to embody the emotional spectrum, but rather to replace it with the endless voids that presuppose the universe before time began, who see not liberty or freedom, but absolution in the erasure of everything. Now, the existence of the Black Lantern Corps is a little convoluted and existed a few different timelines, as all DC stories do. So instead of going through every one, or at least like the main story, we're just gonna go with the simplest explanations and sort of drop that into 40k to see how a Plague of Death would work out. First things first, Necron. No, not the Necrons, Necron, basically a god of death and misery within Detective Comics. Whether he is a creation of the cosmic death as the Chaos Gods represent their own cosmic forces, or Necron is the actual manifestation of the end, we don't know. But what is known is that once summoned into the universe, he controls the dead with complete and utter certainty. This guy is the real deal. He can't be killed, merely sent back into nothing. A punch from a guy who punched the multiverse into oblivion simply kicked Necron out of reality, waiting to be summoned again in another comic run, or today, in a YouTuber fanfiction. Not to mention, if you're a regular mortal creature, basically not a god or a robot, all he needs to do is touch you and boom, you're zombified. The one glaring weakness of Necron is that he cannot come willy-nilly into reality and needs either an especially powerful conduit, as Chaos did the same to Horus, or a crack in space-time itself. I wonder if we've seen that in Warhammer before. So, the main force of Necron's war against life is left in the hands of the Black Rings and those who are conquered by them. Often, someone we've seen who is affected by Necron from beyond the pale, going down a death spiral, literally, before their death, and being reborn with a ring, setting off a chain of events that snowball until he is restored. Black Lanterns themselves spread in two main ways. The first is basic and stereotypical for zombies. They bite or scratch you, turning you into a Necron zombie. Not as strong as a lantern, but still a death sentence. Or they overwhelm someone's emotional core, targeting their own fears, prides, anger, or other heightened senses before literally ripping their heart out, turning that emotional heart into a new ring and placing it upon the victim. With no clear limit, the lanterns can grow exponentially, although there are power gates here. Like Chaos, the Lantern Corps of all colors are limited in strength by the bandwidth which is allowed within the lantern of any branch itself. That's why a member of the Green Lanterns, who are more populous, are often much weaker than, say, the Orange Lantern, who wields a single ring all to himself. The Black Lanterns are no different. Each all draw their strength from Necron's core, which does grow stronger with every heart consumed. So, while theoretically infinite in the amount they can take, they cannot convert new lanterns without care or risk thinning out their own forces. But as we see with the Green Lanterns, even when you have a massive swath of universal soldiers, they don't become that weak in comparison to other heroes, and some are capable of going blow for blow with Superman, at least for a time.
Who would win in a fight between Green Lantern and Peacemaker?
Green Lantern could fight Superman. Peacemaker would get the shit beat out of him.
Then perhaps the strongest feature of wearing a black ring is the undeath bestowed upon them, as once they are brought back to life, they are regenerated to a point just beneath perfect to reflect the zombie-like fear they thrive on, being decrepit and falling apart. All that good stuff. Although in some cases, they can also regenerate completely, capable of blending in with other living beings if they have to, as the ring bearers retain all the memories and often the personality of their dead selves, simply detached or removed from anything but their strongest grievances in life to carry them forward. Even if you attempt to evaporate them with a whack-fuck space gun, they are bound to regenerate and keep on killing. The only way to stop them is to destroy the ring itself, which finally brings us to the weakness of the Black Rings. This really only comes in two forms, but the same source.
the first being raw, pure light, the opposite force of darkness in this wide-spanning emotional spectrum of the Lantern Corps. The second being a less effective but more surgical tool to manipulate the remnant emotions within a host and using them against the ring to kill the Black Lantern from the inside out using their own anathema. Another oddity is that while Necron himself may exist in a place devoid of space or time, the ring bearers are not freed from the constraints of causality. Unlike chaos demons affixed to the warp, Black Lanterns normally perceive and experience time in a straightforward fashion, so something like warp magic or Necron tier tech that moves people through time even just a few seconds can throw them off. Not killing, but strategically relevant. But with that, let's look at how the Black Lantern Corps would come to 40k and what effect they would have on the space. Now, with the Eye of Terror eventually breaking from a single pinhole into a cavernous gorge, the idea of Necron passing through the warp and into the collapsing Milky Way is not off the table, able to supercharge the onslaught of lanterns, as rather than committing ritual, his powers over the dead allow the undying god to turn any corpse into a Black Lantern off rip. And in the many worlds of Warhammer, let's just say he's aloof with choice. I mean, look at these battlefields. Entire fleets of the Votann, Tau, and Tyranids would be wiped off the map. With little in the way of emotional manipulation or even mystical weaponry, they would be transitioned into lanterns with expedited speed. Or at least just the basic zombies, as Necron and his corps waved through them all. No railgun of the Tau nor hive beast of the Tyranids could keep a lantern down for good, not one that regenerates from anything. And as we know, the lantern rings can come to non-human creatures like cats. A Tyranid Biotitan wielding a massive black ring is not only not out of the question, but a scary thought to boot. You might ask, Buster, if somebody needs to feel complex emotions like a cat being scorned by dickish teens, how would a hive-mind creature like a Tyranid be able to take on a ring? For all the others, you'd be right, skeptical viewer. But for the Black Rings, all they care about is that you were once living and now you're dead. Everything else after that is non-essential. You could argue they'd have to have a certain level of intelligence, but Tyranids aren't stupid, especially the bigger ones. Maybe not like a Termagant or a Hormagant, but especially something on the scale of the Biotitans or the Tyranid Primes or any of the other big guys. Be scared of them. You'd have Tau, capable of summoning their already powerful mechs on a whim, going from an XV8 to a Storm Surge, all within the same battle.
You stupid fish, you don't even have a battle suit! What the fuck?
As we get more complex, the battles get tougher for lanterns, but far from impossible. Some, like orcs, might even just embrace the rings, a chance to build
more DACA
at any time, and be told just to kill things? They'd love that. Only after finding out they're under the control of Necron would a boy oppose, but at that point, they're in too deep. I mean, look at what you can do with a ring and tell me an orc wouldn't want to fight in the biggest wars doing this kind of shit times 10. And even without it, they would have to be relying on their weird boys and tech boys to kind of be bringing the most dangerous guns in the hopes that maybe they can do something against the ring bearers. The Necron dynasties would be a bit tougher. Without souls or lives, the lanterns need to fight them directly. Honestly, given the lack of worth they get from fighting, the Black Lanterns may just avoid the Necron tier in the same way Tyranids do, leaving them to carry on million-year-long plays and fight over Dead Sea Scrolls. Eldar are starting to approach a fight. They are all magical, using the warp with surgical precision, and as the warp is manifested of the emotional non-material across the galaxy, could plausibly serve as a counter to the power of the rings. And at that point, it becomes a cross game. How many lanterns? How many Eldar? Is Necron there? This is the first fight where the variables matter, but they have to be swung really heavily in the favor of the Eldar. While they are fast and deadly compared to the mediocre monkeys of the Imperium, a single lantern can fly and summon constructs that rival the strongest Wraith Knights. As a smaller army, Eldar are best fit for hiding and running away to their craft worlds, as they often do even now in 40k. Doubly so for the Dark Eldar. And the worst part, about all of this is that any faction in the crosshair is getting hit by a wave of undead space demigods without warning, as the rings can allow for their users to fly at speeds much greater than light, to travel not just a single galaxy but the universe. Warhammer travel is notoriously slow, and even in the cases where that isn't true, the lanterns are still faster. Granted, nowhere near the Flash running through time fast, but well fast enough to glide through the stars like a wave of oncoming death. In the cruelest regime of all of human history, in the fascist armies of the corpse-bowing empire, the many hordes of guardsmen, Astartes, and bullets would prepare to fight a force of death itself. So powerful that it rivals the Emperor just moments before he was in a duel with Horus, a god ascended truly and properly. The Imperium is a tool that fits most holes. Don't say it.
That's what she said!
They have overwhelming firepower, they have magic, they have faith, they even have emotion, although they are literally driven by fear and fury. Perfect targets for a plague to spread. Imagine a hive world like the one in Darktide, where a zombie plague breaks out, but instead of sickly humans, each zombie you encounter is a super soldier who can throw the Titanic at you on a whim. Any physical force the Imperium has, save for perhaps the Exterminatus class weapons of battleships or the greatest Imperator Titans, would not be able to scratch a lantern, especially permanently. Custodes are fast, they are strong. Perhaps they could martially keep a lantern at bay. If 6 Custodes are worth 1,000,000 Tyranids, a single lantern would be worth 100 Custodes. They are faster, stronger, and unable to be killed, summoning weapons so strong and powerful and capable of withstanding forces that would wound the Superman. As strong as the Banana Guard might be, even they fail to wield such comically overpowered weapons needed to take on this fight. The hangups come in the form of magic. Warp magic, which is infused with emotion adverse to the Black Lanterns. Grey Knights, Sisters of Battle, the Legion of the Damned, all would bring the same capability of the Eldar when it comes to conquering the Lanterns of Necron. But even though it may be possible, the blitzkrieg speed at which the core would be moving and the fractured nature of the Imperium would make Titus's reclamation of the 500 worlds or Gilliman's frantic organizations crumble into dust.
Boys don't get any ideas. I have 2 words for you. Predator drone.
The millions of bodies of Terra and Mars would be turned against their kin. Each hive world with buried trillions of workers into their corpse starch would see an uprising that not only starves, but corrupts every force available. The only one capable of slowing an assault at this magnitude would be the Anathema, the carrion lord upon the golden throne, the emperor of mankind. Any lantern attempting to approach would be overwhelmed and destroyed by the pure psychic eternal light within. But there's a single caveat. The Emperor, as strong as he is mortal. He chose explicitly not to ascend. Necron, a god above gods who does not merely project meaning onto the warp, but embodies the very nature of death and dying, who cannot be killed or stopped, who can shrug off blows that cracked the multiverse into splinters. A single touch upon the Emperor's dying, bone-bearing corpse would end the Imperium, imploding Terra and restarting the cycle. Whether the Emperor finally moves on to becoming a member of the Great Game, or is simply an eternal damned to meaningless uselessness, in the current state of 40k, the Imperium could not outlast such a force of nature. I'm not even sure a united Imperium with all 20 suns would be capable of survival either. Now, many times I've compared the Lantern Corps to the Chaos Gods and how the Warp operates in 40k. Both are driven by emotion. Both work off a kind of bandwidth. Each god or each corps can only support so many members, and the more members they have, the less powerful they are on an individual level. But the Black Lanterns are anathema to the other corps. They are anathema to existence, to emotion. Chaos is not the opposite of existence. Khorne does not represent murder to subvert the real world. Chaos is the consequence of reality manifested in an ugly way. It is as eternal as life is. The Chaos Gods would not permit the end of the great game, because if life were to stop existing, they would stop existing. The warp is not competition, but parasite. As such, they would be directly adverse to Necron and his goals of oblivion. He is actually comparable to Nagash, the Lord of Death in Warhammer Fantasy or the Age of Sigmar. Where ultimate stagnation and the ceasing of everything brings them clarity, the Chaos Gods loathe the end. But their own bitterness also keeps them apart. The Chaos Gods despise each other as much as they hate Nagash or even the new Necron. The most effective way to battle these forces of entropy would be to unite, to collide the emotional spectrum as the Lanterns did to create the White Lantern Corps, but this will never happen with Chaos. One of two things will happen. Either Necron and his Lanterns will kill all other life, erasing Chaos's power over the worlds abound, slowly and surely extinguishing the great game and the rest of 40k from a pitiful, stagnant existence, or Chaos will mount just enough of a fight, holding the god of Undying at bay in an everlasting attrition, ironically protecting the lives of those like humans who they may have vowed eternal conflict against in the past, reflecting the triangle or warfare we see between Nagash, Sigmar, and Chaos in AOS. Khorne, unable to kill that which is dead. Nurgle, unable to infect the ultimate infection of death. Tzeentch, cunning just but never enough. And Slaanesh, appealing to desires which no longer exist. After Necron and the Black Lanterns move through 40k's splintered and warmongering galaxy, he will be closer than ever to ending everything and finding peace in a return to nothingness from before reality began. And there you have it, a rough, general analysis of the Black Lanterns introduced to Warhammer 40k. If you'd like to see the flip side of this idea, the real version of this video of the green, yellow, blue, and other colorful lanterns added to the grimdark future, let me know. And for all you Pacific Rim enthusiasts, I saw you on the mech video. Also, I'd like to start doing something that costs me nothing but helps share everything. At the end of videos, I want to start sharing other creators who I love and who you should too. For right now, I point you to good friend of the channel, Ice Cold Snake. We've covered his videos in streams and he even wears my merch in his own videos, so of course I gotta give back the love.
Buster makes these really cool videos.
You're goddamn right.
If you like retrospectives, especially for forgotten games of the 360 era like King Kong or Battleship, go check him out. If you're trying to start as a creator and want a shout, send me a message on Discord, link below. There's a whole channel and everything for it. Because we all do better when we work together and build a community of like-minded nerds. And as always, a heaping thank you to all my beautiful members and patrons who you can join for just $1 a month to get videos early, get your name on screen, and some other behind-the-scenes goodies. Stay cool, have fun, be awesome, and love unburdened. Buster out.